Hey everybody, it's Elijah Cohen again, day 2 of this 365-day video, blog, journal, something like that. This morning I am still trying to deal with some community issues here at the Stirring, but I have been praying a lot into it, so I feel like the Lord is going to help me get through all of this. It's super humbling, I think, in a lot of ways. Like it's easy for us to be like, who's right and who's wrong and who did what, blah, blah, blah. And I just want to find the right way to be able to interact with people without doing what I normally do, which is just running. And so I'm trying to throw myself at the throne of God and ask Him to just give me grace and peace and work out every situation so that I learn and grow and can navigate better through this time of community, since I can't leave and I can't go anywhere. But what I mainly wanted to talk about today is kind of continue the theme of telling my testimony, which is basically just what God's been doing in my life, my whole life, because I'm now 39 years old. So that means that there has been a very long 39 years of my life. And I realized too that my mom and my siblings missed so much of my life. And I would love for them to, through these videos, maybe get to see my heart. And through that, get to know me better. And it may be the only chance that they ever have to do that. And so I have 9 siblings. I have an older brother and older sister who are half siblings, they're my dad's kids. And then I have an older brother, and then I have 2 younger brothers and 4 younger sisters. So I'm second oldest of the 8, which my dad and mom had. And I'm 4th oldest of the 10 that my dad had. So in a lot of ways, I'm second born, because that's what I grew up as. We weren't really around the 2 older ones when we were kids. So I display a lot of traits of a second-born child, which my mom loves to do a lot of research into stuff like that. So we had a bunch of books around that spoke of those things. So I'm very second-born if you look it up. I was born in Dallas, Texas. I don't remember my birth, but I hear stories about it. And the big story is that when I was a cesarean, so they cut my mom open to pull me out, and as the doctor was reaching in, I slipped and went back in. And so it's kind of a joke, like I looked around and was like, not into this, so I'm going back. So that's the humorous joke surrounding my birth. I have kind of a crushed side of my rib cage, and I think that probably happened damaged wise when that event, like when I was born, probably by the doctor trying to get me out. And my mom always says, like, I cried for the first year and a half of my life. And I'm thinking, if I had broken ribs, I was probably a pretty miserable little baby. So that was my birth. And then my parents kind of lived in Dallas up until I think I was about 4. I don't remember, obviously, any of that. I think my first memories start around like when I'm 6. But I can give you history that I know from my parents telling me stories and stuff like that, is that both my parents became Christians around when they got married, and they got married about 3 years, maybe 3 or 4 years before I was born. I'm not sure on the dates right now, so I guess it really doesn't matter. But so they became Christians. My mom kind of was raised Southern Baptist, and so she had walked away from the Lord for a long time, and then she came back to the Lord around the same time that my dad received Christ. So they started their journey together in marriage and in their walk with the Lord. And then so they went to a couple different churches. They had like a crisis pregnancy ministry. They just did a lot of discipleship classes and home churches, and they were super active in getting just filled with the Lord in the early part of their marriage, before they started the missions part, which started when I was 4. They felt like they wanted to do something missions-wise, and so, and this story is way more complicated than I'm telling it, but The first mission trip that I went on was my parents went to mainland China, and they taught English as a second language. So at 4, I was in mainland China for 6 months. And there's a lot of events that happened in my family during that time, but my mom is writing an awesome book about our whole history of our family. And well, actually, it's her autobiography, but obviously that holds, a huge portion of my life is in there. So I'll leave, if you want details of my life, you can read her book. It's called Dancing on Raindrops, and we're working on editing it, and she's still writing it, so it'll be out eventually. So went to China when I was 4, and then there was a lot of missions, like between 4 and 16 or 17. 16 when I went off to college. I was homeschooled, and we were on the mission field, and we traveled constantly. And the major part of my childhood, the kind of like, I guess the darker parts of my childhood, there was a lot of good things. Like I was super creative. I wrote stories all the time. I remember that. I played video games a ton. I loved to mess with art on video games. So that was kind of like my childhood was like modding, which means just creating graphics for video games. So my love of video games and video game design started like when I was very, very young, and writing as well. Those were my two like main focal. I've never been musical. So it was mainly just the video game design art and writing. And I've never been super great, or I think it's just I've never been interested in actual like 2D, what do they call it, traditional art, like painting and sketching and stuff like that. Like I'm good, but I just don't have any interest in it. So that was the good sides of my childhood. Being homeschooled, I was good in school. I picked up languages fast. Like that's, I guess, of average intelligence. And then the bad sides of my dad had anger issues when I was a kid. So up until the point, I think my mom and I were talking about the other day, I think it's up until the point of like when I was around 6 or 7, he started to really deal with and overcome his anger stuff. But before that, he had a pretty crazy temper, but he had not walked with the Lord for 40 years of his life. So as my mom says, give the man grace. And I was like, okay. So, but needless to say, I got yelled at by him a lot, and I felt like I could never really please him. So for sure, I've got daddy issues, but that'll be clear in most of my story. And later on in my teen years, my dad told me that the reason he yelled at me so much when I was a kid for doing nothing was because he would see me doing something that he did when he was a kid, and he didn't want me to turn out like him, which I guess is an explanation, but it doesn't heal all of the wounds that I have growing up having a dad that I felt like I couldn't please. And my mom is a very focused person. She's very analytical, and she's very organized, and she's very into ministry growing up. So that was a hard thing for me in my childhood, because being second oldest, I had like the responsibility of taking care of the younger kids, and that weight was kind of compounded in me feeling like that it was kind of a balance between a bunch of things growing up. But I think the thing of like the responsibility of trying to take care of my siblings, and then realizing that we were overseas all the time and traveling, and trying for me to keep track of all the kids and make sure they're all fed and happy and getting their schoolwork done and stuff like that. So I did a lot of the domestic stuff growing up. That was a huge part of my childhood, was, laundry and cooking. And I remember in India and Nepal, I kind of managed our like helpers that would come in, like our cooks and our cleaners, and I would help them, and I would speak to them in foreign, in Hindi and Nepali, and just making sure that the house was running. And I just remember like loving that. So even to this day, I love like doing laundry and dishes and keeping my house clean. And I like homemaking, because for me it's therapeutic, and it's I don't think it's a control thing, but it's more of just, I like tidiness, and I like cleanliness, and I like actually getting there. So I like the cleaning part too. So the darker sides of my childhood, I don't want to go into details about any of it, because I don't feel like that's really like the point of sharing your testimony about what God's done in your life. But basically the gist of my childhood is there was many times, probably 6, 8, 9, 10 times that I was molested sexually by men. So growing up, my sexual framework was kind of like locked in place to like the combination of not being able to please my own dad with the only real physical attention I was getting was from men sexually. So that created that like bent, even though I've always been attracted to women as well. So and I dated girls throughout high school and like my teen years. So I had girlfriends and I fell in love with them and all that stuff. So I don't consider myself like 100 billion% gay or whatever. I don't know. I think people go crazy with that stuff, but who knows? So that was my childhood. And then I was raped when I was 13 in a church, in the pastor's office. So that was an event. And I've healed a lot from that stuff. But obviously it's still extreme trauma in that direction of my life. So there were events that kind of, there were other events in my childhood that were pretty traumatic. I think my parents just really, they knew what was going on with me, but they didn't really know how to help. And I think that was really hard for me because when you're young, when you're under 10 and you just don't have any clue what you're doing, you don't know what you're doing. You're not, I don't know. I just remember not feeling right or wrong when I was being molested. Like now I realize I was being molested, but back then it was just like, whatever, guys were giving me attention and hanging out with me. And, we were doing things. I didn't know what I was doing was wrong. So when my parents approached me from the standpoint of like, horribly, I have very strong memories of one of the times they just set me on the bed. It felt like that absolutely no love, like I had just done something epically wrong. And they showed me verses in the Bible and showed me newspaper clippings of some guy that was going around cutting off, the private parts of little boys, like super traumatic for like a 10-year-old to hear all this stuff. And then they just sent me to my bed. So it was an epic fail on their part, I think, but I'm working through forgiveness still. I probably always will be with that. But it was like, why couldn't you just hug me and love me, and tell me like that, that activity is not, godly. Say that, yeah, cool, give me truth, but also give me love. And I think that's what was so damaging, is there was a lot of truth, but not a lot of love. So if you're dealing with those kind of situations in your own life with your kids, just love them and let them know that, yes, that activity is not wholesome and godly, but God, love them and, show them that they can come to you for things. Like that's super important. So that's pretty much my childhood. There's a lot of funny stories and stuff like that, but they're in my mom's book, and so I'll just leave them there unless I tell them another time. I'm going to try to keep these videos around 15 minutes. I don't want them to get super, super long. So just kind of like, I think, for the first bit, I'll just be giving like the breakdown of my whole life, so that's the rundown of my childhood. And this is pretty much video game design and writing and being molested and raped, and did missions. I did a lot of stuff on the mission field too. Like I did tons. I was very close to the Lord. I've always been able to hear God's voice even since I was a kid. So God's told me numerous times that I operate in the office of a prophet, which is different from prophetic gifts. But so that allows my spiritual gifts to be, I have very specific spiritual gifts, a lot of discernment, and a lot of, I see a lot of things. Still learning to operate in that, I guess. But did a lot of ministry with my parents growing up. And I'll get more into that in tomorrow's video. Can talk about like my childhood and experiences in ministry. So thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.